Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was February 24th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today we've got a document from Violant, and the recipient is a certain Brother Guillem de Urges, I think is how we would expand the abbreviation there for that name. It's got a UGES. I think that would be something like an Urge, or I don't think it would be an Urgels. So the identity of this recipient is, I think, a little bit up for grabs. I'm trying to figure out if I can really be sure that the Comendador identity that's listed next to his name in the addressee line below the text block of this letter means that he's a commander of a Hospitaller's unit in a place named Aliaga. And the reason why I'm thinking this is a member of the Hospitallers is because, first of all, that's what Gemini presented to me in its analysis of this letter all on its own. But then I started to look around the folio here, and I noticed that the letter that precedes this one and actually begins on folio 87V, the previous page, it's about the same people. So the letter that precedes this one in the register, it's from 5 days before, and it's addressed to the Pope, and Violant in that letter discusses a Garcia Aznar and also a Guillem de Urges. So in that letter, and in fact it's really easy to see right at the top of folio 88R, we've got the word hospitalis, and so that made me feel like I could trust the conclusion that Gemini reached. But goodness gracious, I have grown quite frustrated with Gemini's analysis and quote-unquote deep thinking, because yet again Gemini has carried out a hallucination, and it has told me, when I asked it about a particular phrase, it gave me an answer and cited sources that don't exist. The sources that it came up for are like weird amalgams of different sources. So it just is still having this problem that I encountered with it when I tried to use it for research purposes back in the fall of 2025. So I think I'm done with Gemini when it comes to trying to substantiate information in the academic secondary literature. It's just going to keep making things up. I tested out 2 of its sources in what it gave me in response to my follow-up questions today, and both of those sources were non-existent. The authors existed, and then they had pieces that were sort of like similar in title, maybe, but basically Gemini just made up the titles of articles. And then when I pressed Gemini on one of them by an author that I recognize and I've referred to a bunch of times, Josep Tranxodena, well, Gemini said that I could find information about the phrase that I was looking for and information about the kinds of phrases used in chancery documents at this time in one of the books by Tranxodena, and I have that book, and I looked at it, and it doesn't have anything about the phrasing that I'm asking about, or you can see the transcript. I was looking at the phrase "Nos le enviamos presentar y fazer por manera que hayam buena conclusio." So it's the last line of the letter before the dating clause, and Violant is saying that the recipient should be... Oh, and see, this is why I was trying to get some help, because I think that the recipient of the letter is trying to get to a good conclusion, the buena conclusión, with the Pope. Or I think it is also possible in the wording of this to interpret it that Violant is going to be telling Guillem de Urges about the conclusion of the business at hand with the Pope. And I'm trying to figure out exactly who is doing what about who. There is certainly a request about Garcia Aznar and trying to get Garcia Aznar some kind of ecclesiastical position. So, all right. All of this is to say that Gemini is quite good at transcribing. It didn't get everything right. It made some significant mistakes, but I would say it was like 90% correct. And so it's way easier for me to take a transcription that Gemini does and proofread it as opposed to typing out an entire transcription. So I will use Gemini for that, for the transcription purposes here. I might go back and try Claude again. I've heard that Claude has had a really powerful upgrade. But anyway, Gemini is good for this image stuff, transcribing the Gothic secretarial hand. But when you try to ask Gemini to do research and to give you some direction and sources from the secondary literature, it's just not up to the task right now. For some reason, it is just prone to hallucinate its answers. All right. We are in this stage, and I don't know how permanent of a stage it is, when Violant is just writing to the Pope a lot. I mean, it's like February, it just really picks up, where Violant is writing to the Pope about all kinds of things, and there's a lot going on with her interests and trying to promote her goals through the means available in the Avignon papacy in that diplomatic nerve center. So I think at this point I've tracked about 4 different people that she's sent over to Avignon in order to carry out some different parts of her agenda. And I think that maybe this Guillem de Urges is one of those, but it's really hard to tell from this little letter, and this one I actually might come back to, because the way that Violant and Joan are arranging their correspondence with the Pope is starting to get really interesting to me. It appears that it is Violant who is in charge of communicating with the Pope. I have to kind of just keep tabs on this because I'm not quite sure, but from the looks of it to me, it seems like there's just this imbalance happening where there's just way more letters from Violant to the Pope than there are Joan to the Pope, but that could just be what I'm happening to look at this point, and I would need a bit more of a systematic search in order to really conclude something from that. And goodness, I'm hoping that sometime this year there's going to be a really great breakthrough, either through my own work trying to get these documents to be full text searchable, or through the work of somebody else or one of the AI programs, so that I can build a database of all the letters in these registers from this year and be able to arrange them and search them and answer questions like, what is the total number of letters that Violant sent to the Pope versus what is the total number of letters that Joan sent to the Pope? But let's just hold off on that question for the moment, because right now we don't have the technological resources to answer it. I mean, I could just painstakingly go through and do some counting, but there's only so much time available, and I do not have time to do that. Let's turn our attention to something in this letter in particular that I think indicates a piece of the puzzle regarding this question about how Joan and Violant arranged their communication with the Pope in Avignon. The letter begins, Fray Guillem. So it's being addressed to Guillem de Urges, the commander of Aliaga. Fray Guillem, el señor e marido nostro muy caro, scrive en favor de Garcia Aznar, canonge de Vic a Nostra Señor lo Papa. Alright, so what that translates to roughly, and I know I messed up a couple things in there due to abbreviations that needed to be expanded, and I wasn't quite sure how. But anyway, what it roughly translates to is to Brother Guillem, the Lord King, Lord and husband of mine most dear, right? So, Joan says, molt cara compagnona, and Violant usually phrases it something like this, marido nostro muy caro. So my most dear husband, and what is the verb? He's scrive. He's written in favor of Garcia Aznar, the some kind of religious position, canonge de Vic. So Vic is a place in Catalonia, and he's written about. So it's Joan has written about Garcia Aznar to our Lord, Nostra Señor, lo Papa, the Pope. And what's interesting is that Violant has also written to the Pope, as we were just looking at that Latin letter from 5 days before. And so it's interesting how Violant is doing this kind of coordination. I do want to say that I'm actually growing somewhat uncertain about the way that Violant addresses the Pope, because there's this weird variation, and I am pretty sure that the prior letter to this one in this register is to the Pope, but I might have to come back to this because there's other letters that are way more deliberate and reverent and include way more of the titles of the Pope than the one that we're seeing earlier here on this folio that starts, well, it actually starts the previous folio on folio 87V. So a lot of questions are coming up about why Violant is not mentioning her correspondence to the Pope, the one that appears right before this, that she had written 5 days before, and then also why she feels like it's helpful to coordinate this communication, and why is it that Joan isn't simply writing to Brother William Fray Guillem. So there's those questions. There's also the Chancery operation question about why is it a 5-day difference between the Latin letter about the same people and then this Catalan, this might actually be some kind of Aragonese Catalan hybrid. Gemini had that idea, and I just thought that might be because of transcription errors, but I'm actually looking at this, and it seems like some of the prepositions might be not so much what I usually see in Catalan, so just kind of that idea popped into my head. But basically, there's just a lot about the Chancery operation that this set of letters, one from the 19th and the other from today, the 24th, just kind of brings up more questions about that aspect of this archive and these particular letters and the issue at hand. So, lots of questions still coming up. And that brings us to the end of the episode. Thanks for listening to this installment of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.